Redistricting is happening. You probably noticed there were some meetings last week. There was a Senate State Government Commission hearing about criteria. There was the first administrative meeting of the fully constituted Legislative Reapportionment Commission. There will be hearings coming toward us for communities to weigh in on maps. And as you know, we're continuing to push for LACRA requirements to be like the LACRA bills to be heard, to be voted on, to be passed. We want to make sure that people are able to ready and able to talk about maps when there's an opportunity to give testimony about maps. So that's an important piece of what we're doing today, is to begin that conversation and to invite you all further into the conversation. And really, when we talk about maps and communities, we want to make sure that as many people as possible are there, part of the conversation, part of the discussion. So today we have Justin Villere from Draw the Lines. He's going to be talking a bit about mapping, bringing his experience with Draw the Lines. We have Khalif Ali, who is the Executive Director of Common Cause. He's going to be talking about communities and how incredibly important it is that communities come together to talk about maps. And I want all of you to be thinking about who in your communities need to be part of that conversation. We have Fair Districts folks across the state. There are League folks across the state. There are Draw the Lines folks across the state. There are Common Cause folks across the state, but they don't all talk to each other. And there are other organizations that are talking about maps, but not talking with those organizations I just mentioned. And it's really important as we talk about maps that there be some level of agreement, because honestly, the folks who are going to draw the final maps, if everybody wants something different, they'll do what we heard last week in the commission, in the committee meeting, which is, everybody's going to be unhappy. They're going to litigate anyhow. So why bother? We don't want that to be the response. We want communities to say, we do have a community. We do have common shared interests. We do have ideas that we want to see expressed in maps, and we can agree on those things. So it's not just, oh, everybody has a different idea. There's some really reasonable ways to do this. We want you to do this in reasonable ways that reflect the communities. And so we want to have that conversation so that we're prepared. So today, Justin Villere will start us off. You'll hear from Justin, from Khalif, from me. You'll also hear from a few of our community organizers to share some thoughts about their own communities. So you'll hear Jean Handley from Dauphin County. You'll hear Debbie Trudeau from Centre County. We'll have lots to talk about, and we'll let Justin get us started. So thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Carol, and hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to speak with you about the nitty-gritty of how you analyze a map, right? So that's really what I'm going to be focused on. As Carol mentioned, I work with Draw the Lines PA. It's a project of the Committee of 70, based out of Philadelphia. We work statewide, and we're a good government, nonpartisan, nonprofit group. And Draw the Lines is our initiative to try to get people drawing their own congressional and state legislative maps so that they can understand the process. We run bi-semester competitions. We just finished just had our deadline for the most recent competition yesterday, actually. And so we've had a lot of people who have taken on this process and done the process themselves, and have really learned all the different ways that these lines can really have an impact. You move one line on the opposite side of a highway, and that can change the nature of an election. But like, what's the both the qualitative and quantitative aspects of moving that line? So that's what I'm going to talk about for a little while here. So as we all know, 2021 is our chance to rectify what happened in 2011 and hopefully prevent another goofy kicking Donald situation. So the court overturned that map in 2011, of course, but they didn't touch the process. And so that process on the congressional side is still in place. Legislatively, which we'll talk about in a sec, the process remains the same as well that it has for the last 50 years. 50? Yeah. And so what we're trying to do today, and as we work together with Fair Districts and with Common Cause and other redistricting advocate coalition members, is trying to make sure to equip you all with the ability to talk about how a map impacts your community and be able to provide solid feedback to the powers that be that are drawing these maps in Harrisburg. So that said, it's helpful to do a quick overview of the two redistricting processes in Pennsylvania. The congressional and legislative differ quite dramatically, so we'll look at that. And we have an additional challenge this year because of the delay in the census data. You all may have heard that we normally get the census data in mid-March. We are not likely to get any type of data until August, and the refined data probably won't be to us until September. So that's going to delay this process even further. And then we have the additional challenge of Pennsylvania's losing a congressional seat. We go from 18 to 17. And so it's going to set off this high stakes game of political musical chairs. And we'll see which district is, or districts are merged, which incumbents are merged. That's a whole conversation that's going on. So thinking about congressional mapping, like I said, we're going from 18 to 17 seats. Current delegation is 9-9. It used to be 13 Republicans and 5 Democrats before the state Supreme Court overturned the previous map. That map had been done under single party control in 2011. The Republican Party held the General Assembly, the Governor's Mansion, and the state Supreme Court. And now things have changed, of course, with Democrats controlling 2 of those 3 branches. So why that matters is because bills or the way a map is drawn is just like any other bill in the Pennsylvania General Assembly. That bill, the map, has to pass both the House and the Senate and then be signed by the governor. So there is some incentive for both sides to compromise here and hopefully create a map that works for Pennsylvanians, not just for the politicians who are going to be running on those maps. I mentioned earlier that we are facing a pretty fast approaching deadline with the census data being delayed. The primaries for the 2022 elections, that primary season starts in February with nominating petitions beginning to be circulated. And then those petitions are due March 7th, March 8th at the moment, I think. There is not a lot of, from what I've heard, there's not a big appetite in Harrisburg to push the primary back. I think people want to get this done so they don't have to change the date of the primary. So that means that this is going to be a very quick process and Harrisburg once the data is available. The General Assembly is a different process. So there's 2 maps that come out of that, the 203 seat state House and the 50 seat state Senate. Both of those maps are not drawn by the full General Assembly, but rather by a 5-member commission. 4 of those are elected officials, actually the leaders of both caucuses in both chambers. And then they have gotten together and chosen a chair of the LRC. And those 5 members with staff will be the ones who are drawing the maps. Whereas in the congressional process, there's not a codified opportunity for public participation. In the legislative process, there has traditionally been more public input available and then a period for public comment on a preliminary map. Our hope, with Draw the Lines, and I think fair districts have echoed this as well, is that we want to see a more robust form for public engagement on how these maps are drawn. I mentioned the LRC membership. You'll notice here the members on the right, they got together and chose, we were encouraged by this selection. The former chancellor of the University of Pittsburgh, Mark Nordenberg, who by all accounts has been a trusted civic leader who's been able to manage a lot of professional situations that would replicate something like the LRC is going to have to do. And he doesn't come with any sort of partisan, overt partisan leanings. So we're encouraged by his selection. It's important to note also that this is the first time in Pennsylvania LRC history that there are women serving on the LRC. It's previously been all white men. And so it's also the first time that there's a person of color on the LRC. So it's history breaking already, and hopefully we can create more history with the level of public engagement that the LRC will engage in. So as Carol mentioned at the top, one of the main purposes of today and then future community engagements that we are going to do is to equip Pennsylvanians with the skills and the language to be able to participate in public hearings or meetings that occur. With this long delay of the census data, there is, I think, a desire among not just advocates, but also legislators to do something while we wait for the data. And the most obvious thing to do is start hearing from the public now. How do you want to be mapped? How does your community, how should it be mapped? What values matter most to you? And so there are going to be, from what we've understood, there's rumors of public hearings, particularly coming to the southeastern part of Pennsylvania. Senator Sharif Street mentioned this during last week's state government committee hearing. So we don't know when that's going to be yet, but we want to make sure when that is announced that there is a very helpful but fervent amount of testimony coming from redistricting advocates and voters like you all. So we'll keep our ear to the ground on that. The LRC for the legislative side, we anticipate that they're going to do these here public meetings as well. In 2011, the last time we did this process, they had several public meetings. They were done in the middle of the day, in the middle of the week, so they weren't very well attended. Or if you were going to attend, you really had to go out of your way to do that. Now with technology and Zoom world in 2021, there is a much greater opportunity for public participation in these. And so we're hopeful that before the data comes out, they will do a much larger set of meetings to hear from the public. There's also a period after they produce a preliminary map or set of maps where the public will have 30 days for comment, and they have traditionally done hearings during this period as well. And then, of course, which we'll talk about how this comes into play in a little bit, there's the opportunity once the final map is voted on, the public can file suit if they feel so aggrieved. And that actually happened in 2012 with a woman named Amanda Holt, who will star in this show in a second. So I've got, the requirements for maps have kind of changed a little bit in just the last few years with the state Supreme Court decision. So it's written in the Pennsylvania Constitution that state legislative districts need to be equal in population. They need to be contiguous, which means they can't be broken from themselves. And then wherever possible, they need to be compact and avoid splitting political subdivisions like counties and municipalities. That did not apply to the congressional districts until 2018. And that was one of the primary justifications for the court to overturn the congressional map. And so we are all, I think everybody's operating under the assumption that that decision holds force. It's the same court for the most part. And so we've been anticipating that maps will have to be drawn to take those four constitutional values as requirements. So there's also the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which Khalif will talk about in just a sec, which is a federal statute that guarantees racial minorities the ability to participate in these elections without discrimination. And so that's something that often comes up in redistricting and needs to be accounted for. And then there are a few values or criteria that aren't required, but are still very important to a lot of people. And Carol's going to touch on these when she talks about mapping towards LACRA criteria later on, and I'll hit a few of these as well. But communities of interest in competitive elections or partisan fairness, however you want to talk about that, those are very important ideas as well. So I think with that, I'm going to flip it to Khalif. Khalif, do you want to spend a few minutes on the Voting Rights Act and how that impacts Pennsylvania?
Sure. So, I don't think we can talk about it without mentioning the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Of course, I think when we think about these two critical pieces of civil rights legislation, these laws, you think about people of color wanting to be seen and heard. So 64 was about being seen. 65 is really about them being heard. So, 1965 Voting Rights Act really just prohibited racial discrimination as it relates to voting, and it's specifically designed to enforce the 14th and 15th Amendments. So, the 14th Amendment is really about if you were born here or naturalized citizen, you have all the rights accorded to all citizens. So equal protection under the law. 15th Amendment is really about guaranteeing the right to vote for all citizens. So it's an enforcement law when you think about it. And then there's another section that's really important as well, is the pre-clearance requirement, not necessarily directly related to what we're talking about, but I just wanted to mention that because it really took into account jurisdictions that were known for discriminating against people of color and holding them accountable for any laws that they would, voting laws that they would create moving forward. They would have to get permission before they made those laws. That was struck down in 2013, Shelby County versus Holder. And that is something that is going to be revisited in the HR 4, the John Lewis voting rights, John Lewis voting, it's the John Lewis bill, that the modern one that they're going to be reviewing. So that will come up again. So that would give teeth back to this 1965 Voting Rights Act. And I'll turn it back over to Justin.
Awesome, thank you, Khalif. So now we get into the nitty gritty. You know, how do we evaluate both congressional and legislative districts? We're going to take a look first at congressional. You can see right here, on the left, the 2012 to 2016 elections were run on the all congressional map. On the right, this was the Supreme Court remedial plan. And so mapping between congressional districts and then state legislative districts are quite different, not just in the process, but in the actual how you're drawing the map. On the congressional side, you know, we're dealing with much larger districts, both in terms of geography, but also population. So in 2021, these districts will have, I think, roughly about 764,000 people in them. That's why, you know, they're so large, particularly in the northern part of the state where there's just not as many people. There's also much less room for what's called population deviation. That is the difference in total population size between every district. In practice, in Pennsylvania, our mappers have drawn each district to be exactly the same, to have the population deviation of 0 or 1. One person, which if you think about it is a little absurd because the census was taken at theoretically a snapshot in time. People are born, people die, people move in and out. And so to kind of handcuff yourself to what is, recognized as a close to accurate, but not like a perfectly accurate snapshot of how many people exactly are living in that one district on a single census day. It's interesting that we confine ourselves to say every district has to be exactly the same. And so the Pennsylvania or the US Supreme Court has actually ruled on this in several cases. And at the moment, I believe the largest deviation that they've allowed on the congressional side is about 0.7%, which is give or take about 27 in Pennsylvania would be about 2,700 people plus or minus from that target population at 764,000. So I would argue that we should allow, we don't have to confine ourselves to this exact, population of 0 or 1 deviation if we can demonstrate that we're meeting other constitutional principles. If we're trying to keep communities together, make sure we're not splitting a municipality or county. And so that's something that as we look at our maps, and Carol can speak to LACRA on this, that I think is important to keep in mind. The other piece is, like I said, the 2018 court case, it changed the guidance for how we draw these maps. Previously, there was no theoretical requirement to split counties or to minimize county splits or municipality splits. But now we kind of, that's something that's now going to be important for congressional mappers to do. And so there's a lot of these districts where, you're dealing with regions and not just municipalities here. So District 12, I think, has 13 full counties in it with a few partials. District 15, I think, has 12 full counties. And so what you're really trying to do is you're trying to limit the number of counties that are split in a congressional district to maintain that constitutional principle. In Philadelphia and Pittsburgh are the only districts or only counties that absolutely have to be split because they have more than 760,000 people in it. So as we think about mapping towards congressional, that is one easy way to get started, we'll say, is trying to just limit those county splits. There is action in the Senate State Government Committee right now to codify the other values or goals that a congressional map would need to have. Setting benchmarks and how compact a district would be, how many splits are too many, et cetera. And then Senate Bill 222, LACRA, is in front of that committee as well. And so hopefully we can see something emerge from the Senate that would put some guidance to this mapping process on the congressional side. The state Senate plan, this is what was adopted in 2012, first used in the 2014 legislative elections. The requirements for this, as mentioned before, are spelled out in the Constitution. Again, equal population, contiguous, minimizing splits, and trying to be as compact as possible. Interestingly enough, the target population, which I've written here, about 260,000 people for each of the 50 state Senate districts in 2021. There's allowed a greater deviation in case law on these districts. We can go, generally the practice is you don't go any higher than plus or minus 5% from that target population. So that's doing math in my head, which is dangerous. You could go up to 5,000 people one way or the other, if need be, to apply other constitutional principles. So that gives you a little more freedom to operate. One of the ways that people are really, or one of the criteria that people are going to be really focused on, again, is limiting splits in municipalities, because this is how the maps were overturned in the 2011 maps were overturned in 2012. Some of you might be familiar with the story of Amanda Holt. She was a engaged citizen, piano teacher, graphic designer who challenged the maps in 2012. And because she drew her own maps, and she's kind of the impetus for what Draw the Lines has done, she drew her own maps and did them in a way that split far fewer counties and municipalities on the state Senate and state side, state House side. And so because she proved that, the court tossed out the original maps. And this is what was left, which I think Gene and Deb are going to talk to you later. They still weren't great, but they were better than initially drawn. And so we'll have more county splits on the state Senate side than the congressional side, just because you're dealing with smaller districts. But there is a way to minimize those as you draw these districts. Then, of course, we get to the state House plan. Same requirements as the state Senate spelled out in the Pennsylvania Constitution. Target population for this upcoming year, about 64,000 per district. So again, we're starting to get really small. And so accordingly, you're dealing with trying to prevent splitting municipalities more so than counties in these maps, since there's going to naturally be a number of county splits. Just there's too many counties that are bigger than 64,000 people. This is also where prison gerrymandering is most impactful, because we're dealing with smaller population sizes. So you may have seen that Leader Joanna McClinton announced last week on the LRC organizational meeting that she has a proposal to account for prison gerrymandering, which is the idea that there are a number of Pennsylvanians who are incarcerated in areas where they are not from. And so the vast majority of those individuals who were counted as residents of a particular county in 2020 during the census, they will be released before the 2030 census. And so they will return home. And so that's when they regain their voting rights. And so therefore they should be counted where they will be voting once they're done serving their sentence. And so this prison gerrymandering often impacts urban communities where those incarcerated are from and will be returning to, and then it raises the population of rural communities where our state and federal penitentiaries are in Pennsylvania. And so this is an area, particularly on the state house side, where adjusting the data to reflect that would have an impact on the state house map. As people draw these maps, it's important to note that there is a heavy reliance on local knowledge for this. I'm from just outside of Philly. I don't know much about the northwestern part of Pennsylvania. And so it's important for the people up there to tell the mappers what they think, about how they want their community to be mapped. I think it's for the mappers who have done maps for our competition. This is not everybody. A lot of people have different ways that they've gone about it. But this one rule of thumb I thought was pretty interesting and I thought very useful. And just a way that people can draw these maps and then evaluate them too. First, just a map to those constitutional criteria, right? You can create districts that are compact, that limit splits, that are within the target population range, and are, of course, contiguous. And there's a ton of different ways that you can do that. You've got a lot of different combinations that occur out of that. You're also doing that or drawing maps to ensure Voting Rights Act compliance. In the simplest terms, that would demonstrate, or that would show up in the number of majority-minority districts that a state has. In Pennsylvania, we've traditionally had 2 majority-minority districts. That means the majority of the people living in that district are racial minorities, and both those districts are located in Philadelphia. We'll see how the 2020 census, if that updates that status, but you want to ensure you're in compliance with the Voting Rights Act with your map. And then once you're at that point, because I said there's a lot of different ways to do this, to draw a map, then you really can start to incorporate those ideas of communities of interest or partisan fairness. So communities of interest, I don't think we've talked about this yet. The the idea behind a community of interest is that there is a group of people that have some shared identity, whether it's geographic, ethnic, economic, environmental, whatever it might be. Those people have a shared sense of identity and want to have consistent representation. And so there's a number of ways that this can be factored in. And that's really what we're going to be talking about through these community mapping events throughout the summer that we would like to have, is how do people define their community and how do they want it to, I imagine they want it kept together when these districts are drawn. So it's important that maps incorporate that feedback and consensus. And the other piece is partisan fairness. So the map that was overturned, the congressional side, that was not a fair map in terms of partisanship. There were 13 Republicans and 5 Democrats that were elected from each of those 3 elections conducted on that map. And so if you did it the other way too, 13 Democrats, 5 Republicans, that wouldn't have been a fair map either. So there are a number of ways to evaluate that statistically that can determine a map that is responsive or fair to both parties and allow for fair representation. I think the most important piece to underline, though, throughout this is that throughout the mapping process, before, during, and after, it's important to have public input and for communities to feel like they've been heard, particularly people who have been cracked and packed previously. Those communities that have been marginalized by this process and kind of used as political pawns. It's our job to go to them in this pre-mapping phase and make sure we get their thoughts on how they want to be mapped. So, where are we at? Oh, yes. So what we can do is analyze the actual maps that we've already seen. I'm going to take just the congressional side, and then we're going to turn it over to Carol and Jean and Deb for the legislative side. But it's helpful to look at 2 different ways that Pennsylvania has been mapped recently. Again, we're going back to the 2012 map and the 2018 map. There's 2 ways to do this. There's quantitatively with the numbers, and then there's qualitatively, like, you know, well, that line should not be there because it cuts this town in half or whatever, right? And so we'll take a look at the metrics first. There's a lot of social sciences progressed incredibly quickly on this front just in the last 10 years since 2011. And you can see the different ways that we can evaluate a map to see if it's fair and if it's constitutional. So the three rows there, the first two are self-explanatory, and the third is actually from, I believe he's at the University of Michigan, a mathematician who had developed a way to simulate congressional maps, and he was used as one of the primary witnesses in the 2018 challenge, in the 2018 federal state challenge in the congressional map. And so he did 500 simulations of different congressional maps in Pennsylvania. And so you can see the range that he achieved on his maps. So looking at the columns here, you can see that the 2011 congressional plan that was overthrown had way more splits than what was feasible, looking at Dr. Chen's simulations. And then the state Supreme Court map that was done by a Stanford professor, that map actually, you know, fit within what was reasonable, the 14 splits. The compactness side, this is a geometric measurement, which is on a scale of 0 to 100. A perfect circle would be 100% compact. So that would be theoretically a 100% perfectly compact district. From our mappers who've drawn over 1,400 maps or so, the average has been about 32 to 33%, and the remedial plan hit that number. The congressional simulations from Dr. Chen, about 29 to 35%. You can see that the 2011 map, this is the Goofy Kicking Donald district. That district itself, I think, is 7% compact, which is just awful. And so the overall statewide average, about half of what the remedial plan had. So when we talk about why the court overturned the 2011 map, those are the two columns that really they leaned upon to determine that that was a partisan gerrymander. The efficiency gap is a metric for something called partisan fairness. And so this was developed by some sociologists who looked at the concept of wasted votes. And so if you are wasting votes, your goal as a gerrymanderer is to waste as many votes from the opposing party as you can. So you want them winning a few districts, 80 to 20, 90 to 10, because they're wasting a lot of votes winning that district. And then you want to win more districts, maybe 60-40, 58-42. And the maps that were drawn in 2011, they favored Republicans by up to 19% and fewer wasted votes than Democrats did. That equated to about 3.5 more seats on average between 2012, 2014, and 2016. The remedial plan actually still slightly favors Republicans, about 1.9%. But there's just a natural self-sorting trend that happens. Democrats tend to congregate in heavier, more dense areas in Pennsylvania, at least at the moment. And so there's going to be a natural Republican skew, for lack of a better term. But 19% has been deemed way outside of what is realistic. So, and then of course, population deviation, they all map to 0 or 1. We would argue that you can give yourself a little more of a leeway. So that's the metrics. That's the fun part. Now we get to look at actual maps here, and you can kind of see the qualitative side of how these districts split communities. So I'm going to go out of PowerPoint and go into the actual maps here. So if you haven't seen the Fair Districts website that has all these maps, they're really, really interesting, and you could waste a lot of time here. I'm going to bring up Berks County first. This is the old, the 2011-2012 map. You can see Berks County outlined here in pink was split into 4 congressional districts, including our famous Goofy and Donald. And what they did with Reading here is pretty, let's say, aggressive. And then if you go over to Montco, Montco actually has 5 districts here. And so what we would, as these events occur, these community mapping events that we're doing this summer, we'll want to hear from you all like, well, why is that line, that line makes no sense. Why is this little carve out here? Why is that there? Like over here, what is this? Is his ear, I guess. Like, why is that there? It shouldn't be there. We want to hear direct feedback from people who are in that that location about those lines and getting that feedback to the mappers so they can hopefully not do that anymore. We go up into Erie, same thing. Erie was split between most maps that I've seen keep Erie County whole on the congressional side at least. But the map here split Erie. We can look at the 17th district. This was a district that pulled a number of Democratic voters from Scranton and Wilkes-Barre into a district with Easton and then Pottsville, and then surrounded by Republican districts here. And so this was one of the exhibits in terms of why it was a partisan gerrymander. And then, of course, you can see the 12th district outside of Pittsburgh, connecting Beaver County with Somerset and Cambria County, with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette called this the emaciated hammerhead shark district. And so again, as you zoom in, like, we want to understand why these lines are there, and what would make more sense. Tell us. It seems like this this line right here, besides these weird little carve outs, this does make sense because that's on the border of a river, one of the major 3 rivers. But there's, I don't know why these districts are there. Maybe it's for population, but what we would hope is that districts that are compact and then kind of keep to these natural boundaries would be preferred. So, all right, we've looked at the 2011 map. Now we can look at the 2018, the remedial plan. I'm gonna pull up just the statewide eval here. The 2011 map, it's hard to get a statewide view because the technology that incorporated that is kind of outdated. But 2018 map, you can see they did, like we noted, they did a really nice job on minimizing county splits. There are a few counties that were split. That is inevitably going to happen. You can't, miss them all. So it would be interesting to note from those on the call over from Centre County, like, did this split make sense? It's kind of hard to see the underlying background map on here, but I believe that's State College right there. Like, could they have moved that line over one way or the other? State College is included District 15, I'm sorry, District 12 should have been in 15. Whatever. Those are the kind of things that we want to hear about in these community mapping events. Same with York. York's another one. York County split up. York itself included in District 10, where the predominance of the rest of the county is in with Lancaster County. And so again, some community or county splits are necessary. To get equal population, you have to have those splits, but it will be really, really helpful to the mappers to understand, well, where, like, just, you don't do that. Just do not do that. I've heard from many people in the Lehigh Valley, like, you have to keep the Lehigh Valley together, right? That's a community of interest that needs to be honored. So we want to find out where those places are and get that information out there. Oh, where am I at here? Oh yeah, so we would love to hear in the chat throughout the rest of the conversation, how well did the mappers do with your district, your community, in both 2011 and 2018? What parts did they really mess up? What parts did they get right? And so just keep in mind that splits have to come from somewhere. And so we'd love to hear, like, the really egregious stuff that you experienced. If a split happened, how did it impact your community and its representation? And then secondly, and you can throw this in the chat as well, if a mapper's standing, or if you're standing over a mapper's shoulder and they're drawing a map now, like what are those sacred boundaries that need to be held together in your community? So I'm going to put that in the chat throughout the rest of the conversation. And with that, I'm going to flip to Carol. She's going to take over and help us talk through LACRA and some of the state legislative side.
Thank you so much, Justin. And remember those questions, answer them in chat. There's also some good conversation going on in chat about some of the things that have been discussed. One question that just was shared is communities of interest. Have they been identified in Southeast PA? Well, really, there's not been a great deal of work on communities of interest anywhere in the state, which is part of why we're having this conversation to kind of kick off those discussions and why we're hoping to have mapping conversations across the state in cities, in towns, in places like the Lehigh Valley. We want to hear from people across the state about what their communities of interest are. And there's certainly many communities of interest, and some certainly should be legally protected, and others, like for instance, I sometimes point to my own county, Chester County. We have people who ride to hounds, and they need large amounts of undeveloped land so that they can do their fox hunting. That is a community of interest. Is that a community of interest that should be protected by districts? I would say that community of interest bumps into the Latino communities in some of our areas that do a lot of mushroom picking. Is that a community that should be protected? So there's different conversations around this. And I think it's important to at least have the conversations, begin looking at what can maps do to help us all feel better represented. But we're not all going to have our own custom districts, that's for sure, because they are going to bump into each other. So just to be heard, I think, is an important piece of this. Another important piece is just to understand why those little cutouts were made. So Justin was pointing to a place along the rivers in Pittsburgh. As I've been mapping Pittsburgh, I've discovered that some precincts or some census blocks cross the river in bizarre ways. So I'm trying to make a really beautiful, neat line along the river, and the census blocks won't let me do that. So simply to have a report explaining that would be really helpful. I'm going to share my screen and talk a little bit about what I've been learning in working on mapping, and also what we would hope to accomplish with LACRA, the bill that Fair Districts PA and the League of Women Voters and some other organizations have been supporting, and how this can play into the redistricting conversation. One of the challenges with redistricting is that there are so many values that you could hold in tension, and so many values that you could use to draw a map. And if those values aren't clarified, if they're not identified, all kinds of things can happen. So for instance, we know that in past maps, the values that have shaped those maps have been trying to accomplish partisan advantage for the people who are drawing the maps, and also protecting incumbents on both sides, and also trying to get rid of people who have been a little too outspoken or have not followed the leader's rules, and also to prevent challengers from getting a good toehold against those who are established and have seniority. There's a lot of games that have gone on in our redistricting process, but none of that is ever spelled out. None of that is ever made clear. And we look at our maps and we think, why did they do that? Why was my school district here in Chester County, Downingtown School District, not a really large school district? Why was my school district divided into 5 house districts? I don't know, but it was done, and it would be nice to have an explanation. So LACRA would allow the legislators' roles to remain the same. We were trying for several years to get an independent redistricting commission in place. Became quite clear that that's not happening in Pennsylvania anytime soon. We ran out of time for that, but LACRA would have some clear prohibitions on what can't be done, some strong transparency requirements, put in law public engagement. One of the questions was, is there a legal requirement for public hearings for congressional or legislative maps? No, there's no legal requirement at all. So the people running the process could say, we're going to have 2 public meetings, or we're not, before the maps are drawn, or we'll let people have a look at the maps after they're drawn, maybe. The congressional maps last time, the public did not have any opportunity to see or offer comment. And in fact, many legislators didn't have an opportunity to see or offer comment. And then there's more clear criteria would also be part of LACRA. House Bill 22, Senate Bill 22, I believe Senate Bill 222 is up to 25 co-sponsors. That's exactly half in the Senate. And House Bill 22, I believe as of today, is up to 84 co-sponsors in the House. We're hoping that they will get a vote. But to go back to the question of criteria, so LACRA would simply say, well, some things are in law already in the Constitution for legislative, but these would be the primary criteria. First of all, districts would provide racial and language minorities an equal opportunity to participate in the political process and not dilute or diminish their ability to elect candidates of choice by themselves or in coalition with others. So that would be taking voting rights principles, putting them strongly into law in Pennsylvania for legislative and congressional districts in a way that protects those communities and ensures that that those majority minority districts that Justin mentioned would be a first requirement within the mapping process. And then districts must be compact and contiguous. The question came up about, should there be a numeric requirement for compactness? And that's a question that we discussed quite a bit. Ohio actually put a numeric requirement. Ohio's different than Pennsylvania. Ohio doesn't have the same geography that we have, and putting that into numeric requirement would make it a bit of a wall against some of the other requirements that we think are important. So this bill does not have a numeric requirement, but it does have a limit on county splits. So no county could be split more than +1 for Congress or for Pennsylvania Senate, +2 for the PA House. Now, there's been some folks, Amanda Holt is one, who have said, well, the real requirement should be a requirement about number of splits overall. And I would say in mapping, to be honest, as a voter, if there's 30 splits or 25 splits, that doesn't impact me as much as if my county is split up too many times. So again, to put that numeric requirement on how many splits puts that ahead of other requirements. And the real challenge is to keep counties from being overly divided. And so we had quite a lot of discussion on that, and putting too much emphasis on not splitting counties or municipalities, or too much emphasis on compactness can work in opposition to some of the other things that really do matter. So those would be the primary criteria. And then also there would be some specific prohibitions. One of them would be a ban on splitting precincts. There's no reason ever to split a precinct. I've worked the polls at a split precinct in Phoenixville, a town near mine, and people are so confused. Why do I have a different ballot than somebody else in the same voting place? It just makes absolutely no sense. And as Justin mentioned, that population deviation is used as an excuse for all kinds of bad behavior. Oh, well, we had to do that because of population deviation requirements. That is nonsense. But this bill would put into law that you're not allowed to split precincts. It would also put into law that you're not allowed to purposefully or unduly favor or disfavor an incumbent, a candidate, a prospective candidate, or a party, so that any attempt to do the kind of games that are done would be specifically against the law. That doesn't mean you can prove it, but it would put that in law that you're not allowed to do that, and something that looks like it is being done for that purpose would be questioned on that basis. The bill would also introduce secondary criteria. And again, so these would be, once you've met those other criteria, then you would also look at keeping communities of interest intact, being responsive by some different measures of responsiveness. In other words, if more people vote one way than another, it ought to shift. And that was a big problem with the congressional map that we had before. It was 13-5, whether more Democrats came out and voted than Republicans, whether there was a red swing or a blue swing, it didn't matter. There were 13 Democrats and 5 Republicans. A map should reflect voters, so that if there's a shift in voter turnout or voter partisan preference, the map ought to reflect that in some way. And then also to conform district boundaries to natural boundaries, and reflect this physical geography of an area. So these would be secondary to those others, but they would be considered. So I want to kind of talk about how that might work out. As I said, I've been doing some mapping because in the process of drafting the LACRA bills, Fair Districts PA reached out to a lot of election experts. We had folks from League of Women Voters, the national office, read the bill. We had folks from the Common Cause national office read the bill. We had Princeton gerrymandering folks go over it and think about it from what they know about mapping. We had a committee of 70 folks take a look at it and see what they thought. Campaign Legal Center read it and offered input. And what we were looking for was, is the language strong enough in terms of minority protections? Is the language strong enough in terms of prohibitions against gerrymandering, but does it reflect the realities here in Pennsylvania? And does it allow for maps that really, really do work for the people of Pennsylvania? So while we were asking those questions of election experts, I also was just drawing maps and inviting other people to do the same so we could see how that worked out, to see, is it possible to use the primary and secondary criteria and draw maps that really do work. And so this is my one of my Senate LACRA bills. I have several, but my idea was to take all of those requirements and to use what I've had the great opportunity of traveling around the state and visiting every corner of the state and hearing about maps from people around the state. So hearing from people in Erie who say, you know, when you divide our Erie waterfront into, multiple districts, that makes no sense. Or, the question of rivers, where are rivers a hard stop and where are rivers actual river towns on both sides, like Williamsport. Williamsport is on both sides of the river. So to use the Susquehanna River as a barrier in Williamsport makes no sense, but other parts of the state it does. I've had phone calls from people who get the 1-800 number off of our Fair Districts PA website and call me up and say, I'm looking at your maps and I'm so angry because I have to drive all the way around this ridge to get to my legislator's office. And I end up going through 2 other districts to get there. And, I'm a Republican in Altoona, but that's that's how it works. Or I'm a Republican in Blair County, or, I live in, so I've heard from people, it's been kind of fun. I get these kind of random phone calls from people who live in other parts of the state just saying, this is just wrong. So my map was trying to incorporate what I know of that, but at the same time, I don't know where all the ridges are. I don't know exactly where all the boundaries are. So I would love to have community input on my own attempts to do this. So one of the really terrific things Justin mentioned is there are all kinds of new ways to measure maps. And there's free mapping apps where you can draw maps, but then you can test them out. So Day's redistricting app is one that I enjoy, but District Builder is also one that Draw the Lines uses. And there's something called Share Plan Score, where you could upload a map and get a score on it. Day's redistricting app has some good analytics, so I'm going to share a little bit and talk about how that can help us think through our mapping. And this is the kind of the initial analytics on my LACRA map, my Senate LACRA map, using the criteria. So it gives you the population deviation. It tells me where my districts lean. So 17 leaning R, 16 leaning Democratic, and 17 falling in the competitive range, which was part of what I was trying to do, is to make it be actually responsive. You need districts that are going to be competitive, that move one way or the other, and then 5 majority minority districts. And so my question is it possible to draw more than 5 majority minority districts? Is it possible to get even more in the competitive range? And is this a map that actually accomplishes what I'm trying to accomplish? You can check maps against other maps on this, that are, Pennsylvania Senate maps that have been submitted by other people. And so I can look and see, oh, look, proportionally, I'm in good shape. Competitiveness, good. Minority, is there somebody who's done better than me? I haven't found it yet, but I'm looking. Compactness, good. Splitting, good. And then you can do something that it gives you this little graphic that shows how your map has done on those measures. But the really interesting piece is that you can compare it to another one. So here I'm comparing my map, which is this green, and to the current Pennsylvania Senate map. So you can see the current Pennsylvania Senate map. And in some ways, the Pennsylvania Senate map is not that bad. It has 5 majority minority districts. It's the same as mine. It's got some competitive districts, got some compactness, proportionality. It has quite a few more splits. So mine measures out better. And then I can compare it against other maps that other folks have introduced in this, recently on Days Redistricting. So here's one, a draw the lines mapper who is more competitive, but not quite as good on splits. And you can compare, what I'm looking for is one that's better on things like, first of all, majority minority. I haven't found one. They're all the same. Something that is better on compactness, minimizing splits, and proportionality. Competitiveness is not a value that we're putting as a high priority, because to draw truly competitive maps in Pennsylvania, you'd have to draw some pretty strange maps, because there are areas that are just never going to be competitive. So my thought on LACRA is, if you have folks who can benchmark, this is the best we can do on this. This is the best we can do on this. Can we edge some of these out and get a little bit better? And you can see that I've been edged out a little bit better, and that's by myself. So that was my original LACRA bill, my LACRA map. I've gotten one that I've got a slightly better score on splits, but that would be a way to do it. Another piece of this puzzle, though, is, so one piece of the puzzle is getting a number of people who are experienced in drawing maps. Let me just go back to, wait, I'm going the wrong direction. One goal would be to get a number of people who have drawn maps to draw maps using LACRA requirements, using what they know of the state, and then compare them, get a benchmark, and then see if we can get them even better scores. But then to invite public comment and public concerns. So that's another piece of LACRA, which is public engagement, to require public hearings before maps are drawn, and invite comment before maps are drawn, and then require hearings and comment after maps are proposed. So people can say, you just didn't get it, or this is not, there's a better way to do this here. And then also to require transparency, so that all data and proposed maps are available online, and then that all plans are accompanied by a full report. That would be a really important thing. So for my own LACRA bill, I would say what I would love is if I could go, take it community by community and have people say, this is nice, but there's a big ridge right down the middle of this, or this is nice, but there's no bridge across the river right there. And that's what we want to talk about right now. So we're going to hear from Jean Handley, who's going to tell us a little bit about her community, one particular Senate district. And then we're going to hear from Debbie Trudeau, who's going to tell us a little bit about her community in Centre County and a number of different ways that maps have fallen short for her. Jean, you're on. Jean, are you able to?
Jean, you're muted.
Yeah, Jean, you're muted. We're not hearing you.
Trying to unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, great. Thanks.
All right. Now, Carol, I don't know whether you're going to be able to follow some of this to point it out or not on the map, but what I want to focus on here is District 48. And District 48 encompasses part of Dauphin County. This right here, and it goes up. Dauphin County is the pink, and it goes up, and it's and then 48, as you can see, is the green part. And District 48 encompasses the lower part of Dauphin County, and it also then goes into York County. And you can see where Carol's pointing there. What I want to point out, one of the big factors, there is a river, the Susquehanna River, that separates the York part from the Dauphin and the Lebanon part of District 48. And this river is obviously a topographical challenge, but it also is another challenge in that there is no way for you to get from the east side of the river in the District 48 part to the west side of the river in York without either paddling across the river or taking an airplane, because there are no roads that connect this directly. If you look at the Pennsylvania Turnpike in Carroll, that would be up above Middletown. I don't know if you can find that or not. You can see some roads in there. If you come across the Pennsylvania Turnpike and the Turnpike Bridge, it will put you into District 31. It does not take you into the other part of District 48. And then if you come down through District 36 and down, you'll see Columbia right there. That is the other bridge that crosses the river. And as you can see, you would have to go through District 36, District 28, in order to get to the other side into District 48. So there is a split there that is very, very difficult to negotiate if you want to, you know, keep this compact. So that's a little bit about the overview of District 48 and how you get from one side to the other. And I'll address a couple of other things in here too. The school districts for District 48, Senate District 48, in Dauphin County, and you can see the green down there, there is a split between District 15, which is the orange, and District 48, and that is for Central Dauphin. So Central Dauphin is divided into 2 Senate districts. It also, by the way, is divided into 4 House districts. That's just a little aside, but in any event, that's one. And if you go to the York slide, the next slide for school districts, and come down a little bit further in here, you will see District 48, and now it happens to be in blue, okay, or kind of with purplish. The District 48 divides the West Shore School District, which is right there where Carol's pointing, the Central York School District, which is right there, and then the York Suburban School District. So essentially, you're dividing communities of interest, both in York County, if you consider a school district community of interest. And quite frankly, when I've talked to school directors, they say that it's very difficult to deal with multiple legislatures when they're trying to get something through. So we have splits in school districts from District 48 in both Dauphin and York. On the next slide, this just shows you the percentage of what is Lebanon County, Dauphin County, and York County parts of the district. And Lebanon obviously is a little bit over 50%. And then between Dauphin and York, it's roughly about 25% each. And some of the things about this district, and because of the river, this makes it part of it really important, is that the river is more than topography. There is very little interaction between the York side of the river and the Dauphin and Lebanon side of the river, and especially the Dauphin side, which is the next piece over there. The sports teams don't play one another. People don't come over to cultural events so much. Businesses, there's not a whole lot of business interaction, and there's not a whole lot of cultural interaction between that because of the river. People just don't cross the river to do that. And so they are somewhat isolated from certainly the Dauphin part of the district and definitely the Lebanon part of the district. Another thing is if you look at Lebanon and Dauphin and York, and because of the ability to get from one portion to the other, it's really difficult for a legislature probably to cover all of that and cover it well. There's some cultural differences, which I'll talk about in a second. But even in York, the York portion of this district, there is no office at all. There for who is the legislature for the state legislative district in this. Now, another thing, as far as some of the cultural differences, let me just back up for a second. And because of that, the people in York especially feel somewhat isolated. And even Lower Dauphin, for that matter, is somewhat isolated from what is perceived to be the majority part of the district, which is Lebanon. And by the way, when candidates they usually come from the Lebanon portion of that district, are chosen from the Lebanon portion. And so the Dauphin people and the York people seem like they feel like they have been somewhat ignored. Some other things about this district are cultural. If Lebanon is primarily for the most part, very, very rural. And then when you get into the Dauphin portions of that district, the Dauphin County portions, it becomes much more urban, much more industrialized, much more populated. And the issues are different for the people in the lower Dauphin part, for the most part, than they are in the Lebanon part. And then if you go over into the York part of it, that is, once again, that particular portion of it is, it's pretty rural. There is some urban parts of it, but it's, once again, I mean, they feel pretty isolated and they feel pretty ignored. So the bottom line is the whole way that this district has been drawn is to favor the Lebanon portion of it, certainly, and the issues that are facing Lebanon, and not those that are facing the Dauphin portion or the York portion, and they feel ignored. And the cultural meshing is not there. The river divides it. And even as far as, we have a fairly large East Asian community in part of Dauphin County, and they totally feel ignored. So, and then they get no attention whatsoever. So that's how it impacts some of, at least our area and the way that this district is drawn. And Carol, you may have some other things you want to add on this.
Well, thank you, Jean, for sharing that. So part of the thought here is that it's just really important for people who know the community to be able to say that district doesn't work. It shouldn't be there. It should not have been drawn that way. It would have been wonderful if Jean and others from her area were able to comment on it before it was put in, into final place. And you want to ask, why did you do that? Because historically, that district did not cross the river. So that this is the first time, this most recent map is the first time that that district has been drawn to cross the river. Historically, it did not do that. We're going to hear a little bit from Debbie Trudeau, who's going to share some thoughts about maps in her area. And then we're going to hear from Khalif Ali, who's going to talk a little bit more about how communities can weigh in and begin to talk about what matters to them. So Debbie, you're on.
Okay, and you can hear me now. Yes, and then I have to do the screen share. Nope, I'm not doing it yet. Okay, can you see my?
You're good.
My Centre County PA maps now?
Yep.
And yes, that was my grandson.
Yep.
Okay, so here's what I have. So going back to the remedial map, you can see where I live in Centre County. There's that lovely split down the middle, and we're going to zero in on that. This is the greater State College area that includes Penn State University. It's a pretty dense town. And you see that we are split between two districts, and it's a nice straight line, but you'll notice that none of the streets really follow anything like that. The lines were drawn, they're township lines. They were drawn 100 years ago, but the community, the homes that have been built up, they don't need any township lines where we are. It's an urban area. And for other arcane reasons in Pennsylvania law, you are not allowed to expand your community and incorporate those areas into the city. So one of the results is we have cul-de-sacs. Now, these are two different versions of the same map. The one on the left reflects what you saw earlier, and the one on the right is, you're going to see more that look like that. So here's a cul-de-sac where two of the homes are in a different congressional district than the others. Here's another situation. These are smaller homes in even denser neighborhood, and one of the homes is in District 15 and the others are in District 12. And here's yet another one. So if you follow that green line, that is the township boundary, and then there is a Devonshire Road. Let's see if I I don't know if you can see my cursor, probably not. Anyway, Devonshire Road is roughly kind of the main street through this neighborhood, and these homes are split apart. And what I learned is that if you straddle the line, you have to see which part of your kitchen, which district your kitchen is in, for the choice to be made. So then we are going to look at some of the house maps. Our Centre County is split between 4 different districts. These are the partisan results from the 2016 election. And you can see State College is pretty much an enclave of blue, surrounded by paler shades of pink and then deep red. So 77 is the only district that is completely within the county. That is our one Democratic district in this area. It dips into very densely populated area of State College that includes the student areas and the campus itself. 76 runs north. It includes 4 prisons, so there's a big impact from prison gerrymandering, because about 4,000 to 5,000 people up there that are counted there cannot vote there. We get 171, which scoops up a lot of State College and then runs heavily east into Mifflin County. This is the district of Carrie Benninghoff, State House Majority Leader at the moment, and one of the members of the LRC. 81, where I happen to live, takes a small bite out of State College and then runs 80 miles south. So here is a picture of that bite. And I wanted you to see this to see the rest of the streets and the density of the town. The area in blue that's called Park Forest Village there is a neighborhood that it's been around a long time, and it's definitely one of the burbs and the bedroom communities to the university. So if we back out of this now a little bit, this is the northern tip of the district. There is, in this topographic map, a mountain ridge, and there's a road to cross it that's north and outside, and the other way to get around it is way at the southern edge. But this whole shape looks like a flying iguana or something. This is a region that has just about nothing to do with the rest of the district. And happily, Rich Irvin is our representative, and he's been a co-sponsor of all of our reform proposals going back. We applaud him for his continued support. And he was quoted in a recent meeting as saying that he is working behind the scenes, and he's been encouraging. So that's good news. Then we get into the splits and cracks. We do have a split precinct here. It happens to be at the foot of my street. So I look down at people in one House district. And then I want to point out that not all strange looking shapes are in fact gerrymanders. There's that weird looking spur by that black arrow. And it turns out that is a fairway of a local golf course that reaches into a neighborhood, which is carefully crafted to scoop around. There's no question that these districts were drawn to create three Republican districts and one lone Democratic district out of this community. So this is the neighborhood where we did our gerrymander walk a while back. Fun photos from that. And here is yet another cul-de-sac that is split between 2 of the House districts. So there's no way to get out of that little area without going through a whole nother district, which seems to me to be ridiculous. So that is my share. And I'm giving it back.
Thank you, Debbie. So we're going to hear from Khalif. He is going to tell us about what Common Cause is doing, working on this. And he's also going to be doing some train the trainer events because what we want to do is have people ready to help hold conversations about maps all across the state. Justin, Khalif, and I are not able to host events for everybody in Pennsylvania. We're hoping that some of you on this call will say, yes, I want to do that for my community. And so Khalif is going to tell you a little bit about what they have in mind and just a little bit more about community events.
Okay, thank you. So thanks, Justin. As Justin gets that situated, let me first say that when I think about any of the issues that we work on, the coalition organizations, whether it's C70, League of Women Voters, Fair Districts, I think about, you know, our stance on democracy and how important it is to us. You know, and as you can see, there's a number of various activities around redistricting reform that are going on throughout the state. You know, we got LACRA, we have a number of organizations working with software that can help draft maps. But ultimately, the question is about where do we stand and what level of participation that we're willing to give. The integrity, when you think about the integrity of democracy, you think about what role that the average citizen can define for themselves in the resolution of a particular problem. So, you know, it's great that we do the work that we do, but we're highly, highly reliant on your participation in those activities as our partners in order to make these things work. So when we think about all that we've heard around the maps and the gerrymandering, you've seen perfect examples that I've seen throughout this presentation, and you see those same examples in districts throughout the state. You want to think about community mapping. Okay, next slide. Well, you can go to the next slide. So you could very easily call community mapping community storytelling, right? Because what we're doing is community mapping is literally about how a community chooses to define themselves. But in defining themselves, they're actually telling stories about what's relevant, what's important, what they value within the context of that community. So, you know, although it's community mapping, because we're talking about, you know, plotting what you consider to be valuable on a map, it's really community storytelling. You're actually, a facilitator will walk you through a process in which you're essentially telling a story about your community and why it's important and why it matters and what portions of it should be included. And you've heard from a number of our presenters about, you know, all of us have different things that we value in our community, and we want to see certain things that we want to be included in a district per se. And some of it may be possible, some of it may not be possible, but it's very important to keep in mind that, you know, there's an opportunity available with us and with a number of organizations where you can clearly define what you consider to be important within your community. Now, with community mapping with us on, there aren't any specific rules regarding how we do this, right? So when we talk about what's important to you, we're not actually drawing a district. We're just focusing on a particular area in which maybe you live or you work or where there's a lot of interaction that you're part of. So there's not a population set. There's not county splits that we're talking about. None of those things are as important, right, when we're talking about community mapping. Next slide. So when we think about why community mapping is useful, keep in mind community maps are not official. They build knowledge and power, and they encourage community members to think through what their community really is, what it looks like on a map, and why that community should be kept together. Those community members will be better able to participate in public hearings and articulate, for example, what is wrong with a map that dissects their community. So we've heard about that. You know, Carol spoke about why it might be important for you not to express why your community should not be split, why your county and the municipality shouldn't be split. And being able to document it and then come back and reinforce it with testimony is a key part of this process. So when we think about how the maps will be used, community maps are meant to educate and empower citizens and enable them to better participate in public hearings, like I was saying, to weigh in on what maps are good or bad and why. But in addition, community maps can become the building blocks of district maps. And that's one of the things that is important here. Volunteer map makers can use the maps they have made to more meaningfully participate in public hearings. They're documents that you're simply going to reiterate and emphasize at a particular public hearing. Next slide. So what are some examples of communities? So it's not always necessarily strictly geographic. You know, there's residents of regions with unique environmental concerns. So if you're in an area where living in a community or area where there's fracking or any environmental concerns, that could be a community. Communities where communities rely on the same public transit, that's also an issue. Residents of tourist-centric towns, that could be considered a community. There's no particular designation in terms of whether it could be rural, urban, or suburban. So all of those areas can describe what your community is. This is an opportunity for you to be able to define what you consider to be a community based on interests, values. You know, those are things that really you're taking into consideration with the community of interest. Next slide. So when we think about community mapping, and we're asking ourselves, so who is the best person or expert to talk about your community? You know, you click it one more time, Justin. So there are no better experts for your community other than you. The members of your community are the subject matter experts, right? And so there's no better situation than to have you to discuss that, those important matters, what's needed, what's valued, what should be kept together. And we saw a number of areas in the examples that were given by the presenters about split communities for various reasons that may or may not have been favorable to community members. Next slide. So when we talk about, when Carol mentioned we're working on, we're going to facilitate a train-the-trainer. The purpose of that training is for you to be able to bring together your community and facilitate a conversation for community mapping. You would be a facilitator. You would invite individuals to come, well, I guess virtually come to a meeting and discuss, and you would pull up a map. We use District R, but we're also willing to talk about the possibility of using other software, but simply training you to be a facilitator and use that software to document what you consider to be important. It's train you on the use of software, provide some basic facilitation skills, document those. You document the conversation on the map, and the map would, in District R, I'm not sure about the other softwares that were mentioned, it saves in the cloud, and it is able to be used for the construction of a larger map, or just to be used as a data set to be submitted to the LRC for consideration. So you're learning about District R. You're also preparing yourself for public testimony as well, because these stories are essentially the same ones that can be told at these public hearings. They're the same ones. So it's not going to be anything that I mean, like Justin said, we can definitely prep and help you to get you within that 2 minutes. I think it's 2 minutes, right, Carol? I think it's 2 minutes that they'll provide for public. We can help you get within that 2 minutes and get all those points out that are necessary for them to hear you. So this is just the next step, I think, in what we consider to be a very comprehensive approach to redistricting reform. There's bills, there's software that we're all using, There's maps that are going to be generated. There's us, and all of us are going to be watchdogging the LRC to ensure that there's transparency. There's public hearings. There's public input that's taken into consideration. We're all going to be doing that, but this is another step for those of you who want to be hands-on and want to have a more personal impact on the way that these maps are drawn. Now, oh, I'm sorry. There's one other thing. This is a trainer for the facilitators, but I would also, if you're interested in signing up, I would also encourage you to come with a partner. And I'll tell you why. As a facilitator, you want to be focused on the conversation that you're having with individuals that are in your Zoom meeting, right? It would be better to have another person who's marking the map with the different areas that the conversation is leading you to document. You know, like if you're saying, like I live in Hazelwood in Pittsburgh, right across the street is a different district with a polling station. It's a nonprofit called the Center of Life. I'm 99.9% sure when I do this exercise in Hazelwood, they're going to say they want community of life in that district. So someone would have to document that or mark that on the map while the facilitator is carrying on the conversation with the other individuals who are participating. So it's not impossible for you to do both, but it's probably best if the facilitator is totally focused and immersed in the conversation that's going on. That would be my 2 cents to add to that. Not impossible to do it yourself, but I would suggest having a partner involved. Now, in terms of our initial trainer, it's not going to be until June 24th. It's going to be a little later, but it's going to be an evening one, probably around 6. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop in the chat box you can click it, Justin. So that's my contact information. But what I want to do is drop in the chat box a sign up form so that you can sign up for to participate as a facilitator. You can also sign up, and if that's not something that you think you might be interested in, there's 2 other positions. You could sign up to be a helper, meaning if there's a person who's facilitating a conversation in your community, you can help with that conversation by convening or organizing, making sure everyone's there and helping with the marking on the map. And you can also be what we would probably refer to as an ambassador, and that is identifying groups that would like to participate in community mapping, and you can refer them to us, and we would be able to take it from there. So give me 1 second. Let me just grab the link and drop it in the chat box. Yes, great question, Mark. I'm about to put it in here now for you. There you go. So that's the trainer sign up. Thank you for your time, Carol, and I look forward to working with everyone. And I can, take any questions. That's my contact information. Please pummel me with questions. I'm open to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Khalif. And so for fair districts, we are going to be working with Common Cause on these train the trainer. In terms of encouraging people to participate, our goal is to see community mapping events across the state and to kind of see where there are people lined up to do it and to see where there aren't, and then to find ways to help have events across the state. So we're looking to work together with partners. As I said, no one person can do all this, no one organization can do this, and we really need folks from all across the state to be at the table when maps are drawn. And that means building stronger coalitions, partnering together, having people say, look, it's not my deal, it's not your deal, it's none of our deal, it's none of our table, it's none of our map, it belongs to all of us. And if it reflects us all well, we can all be proud. I will say, so we're working hard to get LACRA passed. Even if LACRA doesn't get passed, we have at every level, the folks responsible for maps hear that the community wants to be involved. And there is a commitment this time around to help make that happen, because they know there are so many people watching this that if the community is not involved, it's going to be a problem. So we want to be involved well. We want to show that having the community involved is much better than not having the community involved, and ends up with better maps, better buy-in, less litigation, less hostility, less partisan extremism, and a more functional legislature. We think the fruit of this work will be huge. So whatever way you see to buy in on this, please do. If you can volunteer for the Common Cause Train the Trainer, please do. We want to continue these conversations. I am going to throw into chat one contest that's the Draw the Lines contest ended. There will be another Draw the Lines contest coming on a more limited basis, but it's not announced yet. Princeton gerrymandering folks are doing their first contest, and that the deadline for that is in a couple of weeks. If you just want to try your hand at, how do you draw a congressional map, take a try. It's kind of fun. I honestly, congressional maps are fun and they're easy, and you can do one in a couple of hours once you get the hang of it. State Senate is a little bit more time consuming. State House is a lot more time consuming, but it's really helpful just to spend a little time seeing kind of the parameters of how they work and realizing, okay, we're working within census blocks. We've got to think about it in that way. So there are things to think about on that. We've come to the end of our hour and a half. Thank you all for paying attention to this.